Hi, Matt. Good to meet you.
Hello, good to meet you too, Rich.
Yes, indeed, indeed. You are Matt Ehret, and you can do a little introduction in a minute, but I just want to let people know we are recording this on Tuesday, the 9th of December at 22:07. So 7 minutes past 10 p.m. UK time. And I know you've been on with Tom Luongo loads and everything, and it just made sense to reach out to you, given that I think there's a lot of overlap in the stuff you do and the stuff that I cover, and I'm interested in what you have to say as well. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself, since this is the first of many times you're going to be on my channel?
Sure, yeah, it's an honor to be with you, Rich. And yeah, I've admired your work from afar, so it's a pleasure to finally be able to speak to you digital face to digital face.
Yes.
And yeah, Tom's been a good friend for a long time, Alex too. So yeah, the I guess myself, when people ask me what do I do, I it's difficult to categorize myself into some little niche box necessarily, but I write a lot, so I'm a writer. I've written some books on Canadian history, on American history, on occult, secret societies. The Revenge of the Mystery Cults is a new trilogy I just produced. My wife also does something very similar, and so we work together, and we also co-run a foundation called the Rising Tide Foundation, to focus a little bit more on cultural and educational warfare, because we found that the geopolitical writing was sometimes getting a little bit heavy on our souls, and we're like, let's create a bit more of a more edifying space to generate some creative thoughts, and to bring about more collaborative efforts from poets and from artists and from scientists who like to think outside the box. And so we do that as well. And most recently, we've been making movies. So we've got a little film studio, and we've made about 18 little documentaries now, some bigger, some smaller, but they're all fun. And those are available on our websites, CanadianPatriot.org and RisingTideFoundation.net.
Correct. Canadian Patriot ORG and risingfoundation.net. And I'll have those and your X handle in the description below, and people can find your work. Because also you do podcasts, you're on YouTube as well.
Yeah. I usually don't say no to podcast requests, so I do a lot of podcasts. So yeah, I'm available on YouTube. Yes.
Right. Fabulous. Okay. So one of the things when we were talking about what to talk about, you said you've done a lot of investigation on how the British set up the deep state in the United States.
I have done some work on that topic. Yeah, that's actually one of the themes that I was using to try to guide my first. So I did back in 2012. I put myself in a serious fashion on a research project. Actually, it began in 2007, I suppose. And at the time, I was still working as a volunteer with the LaRouche organization. I know you sometimes have Susan Kakinda on your show, and
It's funny. I do Susan Kakinda once a month at least, from the Promethean Action, and Harley Schlanger and Alex Craner once a month.
wow, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, and the principles, they differ in details, but the principles are the same, and I feel like that's the same for me too. It was a big formative part of my own development early on, going from radical conspiracy theorist, kind of black pilled, and for me, 2004, 2006 was my black pilled, everything's a lie period, where I got kind of dark, but for reasonable reasons, and for me, 9/11 was the big, you know make or break it, or over whether I believe the narratives of my society or not. And so I was finally persuaded that the story of 9/11 was a fraud, and it was done by something actually closer to what's controlling my own society, and that's tied to what killed people like John F. Kennedy, that did things like Iran Contra, that did Vietnam, killed MLK and everything else. So I was like, okay, I was piecing it together, but I didn't have a solution. So for me, when I began to volunteer with the LaRouche organization, which is what I did from 2006 to 2016 for about a decade full time, it was in many ways, a very, very important growth period for my own mind and heart, because I found that they were the only organization that I could make sense of anywhere, and there was a small outlet in Canada at that time that had solutions. So they both recognized the ugliness that other people were not able to look at regarding the New World Order agenda, depopulation agenda, all these ugly things, but they weren't cynical. They actually had a sense of something good that had happened that I didn't understand how to think about, and that could be brought to life again in the future, that we could organize around, that I also didn't have enough of a sense of. So I needed that. And so for me, I began political organizing, and it was Canada, though, and it's an American organization. So I found myself with other younger members. There were just a few, but we were a little bit frustrated that there wasn't enough work that had been done mapping out the terrain of what is this thing called Canada? Why do we have a monarchy, the only one of all of the Americas? It's here, Canada. Why do we have a governor general that represents the power of the throne in the the Commonwealth. That's the literal head of state, is the Governor General. It's not the Prime Minister. Why do we have lieutenant governors who are these unelected agents who have to give royal assent to anything that becomes law or doesn't become law, that have the authority to veto if they want to? They rarely need to, but it's there. What is this deep state structure in Canada? I've got a better sense of it in America because of, having joined an American organization that did a lot of the mapping. But in Canada, the work hadn't been done, either in the past or in the present. So that's what I sort of set myself on as a bit of an obsession for a few years. And some fun discoveries were made along the way, recasting what a more reasonable history of Canada looks like, with a lot of. So we did 4 books. So I began publishing my findings with a few of my friends in the form of some books that became the Untold History of Canada book series. There's 4 volumes of that, dealing with such questions like why was Benjamin Franklin up organizing in Montreal for 6 weeks before the Declaration of Independence was signed? That's a big anomaly, a big paradox. Why would Benjamin Franklin, the guy who organized the founding fathers, the guy who was like the greatest scientific mind and known as the Prometheus of America, who without being from a high noble family or without an elite education at the Sorbonne or Oxford was able to trump all of the minds of Europe over this question of what is the nature of electricity and how to harness it for human use? So this guy was, in his mind, when you read the writings of Ben Franklin, who was up here and organizing the first postal service of Canada, it wasn't a British imperial agent. It was Ben Franklin organizing Canada's first postal service, our first newspapers. That was an anomaly that I really began wanting to solve. And why was it that his efforts to persuade the Québécois, the French Canadians of the time, that's what Canada was, right? To join as the 14th member to the other 13 colonies to say, together, we will now for the first time establish on this earth a new type of government founded upon the consent of the governed, the rejection of hereditary rights of kings, and the principle that all men are created equal, not just an elite, but all human beings are sovereign, in that concept that emerged with the Declaration and then the later Constitution. So that we failed. We said no. We'd rather stay with the crown. And so I was like, well, there must be a story there, right? And so that became my entry point to try to put something a little bit better together that became ultimately a whole 200-year history that brought in the Roundtable movement, later on the Fabian Society, as think tanks that were concocted to ensure that the principles of Abraham Lincoln and his American system that he died defending, and that worked to very good effect in empowering the sovereign nation state of the United States to develop real economic sovereignty. And it began to spread in a positive way around the world as other nations began adopting it and using it to increase their productive powers of labor and cooperate together on big projects. The Bering Strait Rail Tunnel being one of those things that we were moving towards in the 19th century. And again, the empire had to stop it. And the way they did so was by creating an array of spooky think tanks, of which the Roundtable movement was one, the Fabian Society was another, and the Theosophists were yet another aspect of these psycho-spiritual intelligence warfare operations designed to destroy this potential new emergence of a better human society founded on natural law. And so again, all of that became part of the books. And then later on, the Clash of the Two Americas book series had less of a Canadian and more of an American focus to tell a similar kind of story as well.
Okay. Matt, there's so many directions we could go in, right?
Yeah.
From what you're saying, right? Forget about what I said at the beginning. So I got 2 questions. So one, hopefully a short answer, and then we can go to the second one, which could be a more in-depth conversation. So I've come across evidence that suggests that JFK, the British were involved. They did that, right? 9/11, I didn't know that they were involved in that. I thought that was the Zionists and the neocons in the United States. And then MLK, was that the British too?
Well, okay. So for the case of JFK, yes, but that's actually a chapter in this book here where I have JFK on the cover with Zbigniew Brzezinski as volume 2, The Open versus Closed Systems Collide. And there's several chapters in here going through the Anglo-Canadian intelligence operation of Permindex, the Permanent Industrial Exposition, which is a sort of an assassination bureau set up as an offshoot of Anglo-Canadian intelligence during World War II under a figure named Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, who was very close to William Stevenson, a guy who was a Canadian Grandmaster spy who Winston Churchill called intrepid. And this figure created something known as Camp X in Oshawa. And Camp X, which was set up around December of 1940, was designed to try to infiltrate, to take over control of U.S. intelligence and covert actions under MI6, and actually, more MI6 operating principles. And the way they did that is they couldn't do it legally because America was still neutral. They couldn't get into America not being officially in the war. They couldn't work on that level with British intelligence, and so they used Canada as the intermediary. That's why Camp X was selected there. And what it did is it trained the vetted figures from within the OSS to utilize black ops tactics that had been developed during the days of the British East India Company, and basically the dark arts of psychological warfare, assassination, everything else. And that's what it was throughout the entirety of the Cold War of World War II. After, when the Cold War began, Camp X, which was something, they basically began to fizzle it out and transform its functions into a civilian front group called Permindex. That was the agency used to try to kill de Gaulle. It was behind the assassination of Aldo Moro from Italy, at the time a major industrialist helping African nations to develop themselves and break free of colonialism. And it had deep penetrations into the deep state complex that was tied to Clay Shaw, many figures in New Orleans who were members of the board of Permindex. And Louis Mortimer Bloomfield himself was very close to Prince Philip Mountbatten, as well as Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. He was, in fact, a vice president for 2 years of the World Wildlife Fund from Nature, while Prince Philip was still its president. And this was an agency that Prince Philip and Bernhard, who had earlier created the Bilderberger Group, had set up in order to essentially shift the values of society away from trying to stop or save humanity from empire into a new set of values they wanted to create, premised around the notion that we have to save human society from itself, or save actually nature, ecosystems from the destructive parasitical effects of human industry that had to be stopped at all costs. Right?
Yes. So
that's
all the better to control us for our own sake.
Yeah. So Mortimer Bloomfield is kind of everywhere. Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, had written a book where he documents his findings years later. He's the guy who Kevin Costner played him in the movie JFK. But he, as a real man, wrote many more books documenting his findings until his last days in 1991, where he goes through pretty rigorously tracing out the role of both the CIA, but also this Permindex operation under Bloomfield, but also tied to the high noble families of Europe that were working together with Bernhard on the board of the 1001 Trust, which also featured some of the highest leading noble family members of the old houses of Europe that were working together to kill JFK and everything he represented. So Jim Garrison's book On the Trail of the Assassins goes through a lot of that. It's a valuable book. But it also shows that it's not just one thing. When you think of intelligence, it's not just like, oh, it's just the CIA or it's just British intelligence. It's not just this one thing. It's a complex that involves aspects of unreconstructed Nazis and Italian and French fascists who were never punished at Nuremberg, but were brought in to coordinate a new type of global system of management under NATO that was called Operation Gladio and NATO's secret army. And that's what somebody who was fired by JFK after JFK fired Dulles and Richard Cabell, the second in command of the CIA. They were both fired by JFK in 1961. He also later on fired Lyman Lemnitzer from the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Lyman Lemnitzer was also one of these figures who was very, very enmeshed as an asset of this beast and was immediately given a new job as the head of NATO, where he began to immediately coordinate with Allen Dulles the utilization of a lot of these unreconstructed Nazi fascists, including some French fascists who were sent down to Dallas, Texas, to also help coordinate some of these various teams that were deployed as mercenaries to carry out the trifold, the three-directional shot, and then blame it on this throwaway, disposable character by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. So there's a number of elements. Also involves the mafia, which is not separate from this other thing. The mafia from the top has always been an aspect of these intelligence agencies, which is why Samuel Bronfman, for example, who's the founder of the patriarch of the Bronfman dynasty, was also made a Knight of the Order of Bath, which is a British order, a chivalric order for the highest level mercenaries for the empire. So this is the guy who's the head of this, illegal booze smuggling operation that creates the foundation of what becomes organized crime. Mayor Lansky is even below his operation. And these are agents that multi-generationally are still in managerial positions, like Edgar Bronfman, or Charles Bronfman as well, is a privy counselor to Her Majesty in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. Their sons set up Parabros which is what becomes which merges with Brascan, another Bronfman operation that runs all of the infrastructure, basically the hard and soft infrastructure, mostly hard infrastructure of Brazil is run by Brascan, that the Bronfman dynasty also operates from the 1960s, 70s. It merges with Edper, another Bronfman foundation in 1998, which becomes Brookfield. Brookfield Asset Management is the consequence of the merger of these two things that people like Mark Carney found himself steering for a number of years. That basically is it's a gobble machine, right? Its purpose is to just acquire as many hard assets around the world. But so this is the thing that's tied to the thing that killed JFK. It's also tied to Louis Mortimer Bloomfield's, I believe it's his nephew. I forget now the exact relation. Bloomfield, the Permindex office was actually located in the Montreal branch of the World Trade Organization. It's still there today. The World Trade Center. It's in Square Victoria in Montreal. There's several branches of it, one being in New York. And I think it was his nephew, was a co-owner, don't quote me exactly, but had a very controlling interest of the New York World Trade Center later on. And a lot of the personal papers of Louis Mortimer Bloomfield himself were legally supposed to be revealed to the public in 2004, which is 20 years after you're dead. The law is your private writings are supposed to be made public if they're in the archives of Canada. That just didn't happen. So to this day, nobody's been allowed to see what's in his private writings that would possibly reveal some of the inroads into both JFK's murder, but also something like 9/11 that did involve the collusion of both CIA, it seems Anglo intelligence operatives as well that are tied to BAE systems. I think Susan Kakinda knows a thing or two about BAE systems and the military intelligence side of things that helped create this slush fund of cash through the Al Yamama deal with Saudi Arabia going back to the 1980s under Prince Bandar bin Sultan. That created like something like $100 billion of off-the-books capital by selling arms for shiploads of oil every day for decades. And then providing that money then became very conveniently used for black operations, including some of the elements of 9/11. So does that mean that the Saudis or the British did 9/11? Well, no, you can't say it so simplistically as that, right? It's more of a dynamic. And at the time, the Saudis were, I think, a useful front. There's clearly a deep state structure baked into Saudi Arabia. It's not all of what Saudi Arabia is, but that's what a big part of what Prince Bandar bin Sultan represented at that time. It involved figures around the Trotskyists or the former Trotskyists who became the neoconservative movement that incubated itself and grew under the influence of people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Kissinger, who ensured that these former Trotskyists and Straussians like Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz were brought into positions of influence under Carter and Ford, and then later had their full takeover in the late 90s to oversee the new Pearl Harbor operation that they wanted in America to shift the thinking of the United States in a similar psychological trauma that paralleled what had been felt in 1941 in the United States, that allowed for people who were against war to all of a sudden advocate and give their acquiescence to a banker's war that was never supposed to end. So yeah, there are these common threads, right? But it's not so like linear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Matt.
As far as MLK, I didn't do the thorough work I need to do to properly speak to that. But what I can say is that the guy who was thrown under the bus as the lone killer of Martin Luther King Jr., he was actually found, he was running around for like a month with multiple passports. He was ultimately found in Toronto, which is a strange place to be, with passports that were clearly given to him by forces that had a lot of influence to manufacture very convincing passports. But he was so Coretta Scott King, many of the family members of Martin Luther King got to know him, see his story over years, and they came to the conclusion that it wasn't him, that he was a patsy, a scapegoat, just like Lee Harvey Oswald had been. And there was a Tennessee court hearing in the state of Tennessee put forth by the King family, where a jury trial concluded that based on the evidence that they had seen, that the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. was carried out by a conspiracy within the government and that utilized certain assets in the mafia to do so. And that's a jury trial, a state jury trial of Tennessee in 1999 that carried out that conclusion. So there's something there too. Just saying.
Well, it would make sense given what he was talking about, crossing class issues. And he was incredibly popular. And then also the overlap with Malcolm X, who was also addressing class issues. It wasn't just a race thing anymore. Okay, now I want to go back to JFK and what was the threat that he posed that the British wanted to get rid of him, or whoever it was, the CIA, Mossad, MI6.
You might want to have.
I know about Mossad, like I've heard that conversation, why the Israelis wanted to get rid of him, because he wasn't willing to give them their plutonium, and also he wanted to make APAC register as a foreign agency. So, but what was it that he represented that was a threat to the City of London? Was it that he wanted to go back to a silverback currency, that he was anti-war?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a chapter 20 in my book on open versus closed systems. It's called "Remembering John F. Kennedy's Vision for a Future That Should Have Been." Mm-hmm. And in it, I draw heavily upon a lot of the writings and research that had been carried out by an individual you might actually want to eventually have on the show called Anton Chaikin. And Chaikin was, for a long time, he was an EIR historian. He published some of the earliest works successfully mapping out the origins and structure of the U.S. deep state going back to 1776, called Treason in America, a 1984 book that he published. He published this today he's 84 years old and still very active and very, very productive. But so he did this wonderful research project on, for the first time, I don't think anybody did it this way until Anton carried out this project, is simply just map out what were the concrete policies on every front: economic, cultural, social, scientific, military, that JFK was acting upon at the same time, right? To get a mapping both of like what was his idea, his strategy. And it wasn't just him renegade. He had a network that he was collaborating with, in order to then get a better appreciation of the holistic, dynamic thinking and strategizing that he wielded, which today too few in the political class are able to even get close to. And so what Anton reveals very beautifully, and what I tried to reconvey within that chapter, is John F. Kennedy's vision for a world liberated from empire that would be beneficial, where every nation would have the right to access scientific and technological progress, industrial progress. He had the first person that he invited to the White House upon his inauguration was Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana.
Wow.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. So he had a whole strategy with the founder of Pan-Africanism. So that Kwame Nkrumah, who had earlier studied in the United States, learning the ropes of empire, working with many like-minded figures within the United States under Franklin Roosevelt, who had an aspiration for extending the New Deal revolution of mega projects, the utilization of the sovereign nation state as an instrument for emitting productive credit for the purpose of building up the productive powers of labor, building hydroelectric dams, providing the capital to create a space for the private sector to also blossom, as we saw with the case of the major New Deal projects of the 30s that Kwame Nkrumah came from Africa to study. And then he worked with people like Paul Robeson, the great baritone singer and actor, but who was also a cultural diplomat and a fighter for this anti-imperial front, and who created this Anti-Imperial American Africa Council in 1944, which Nkrumah was a member of. So Nkrumah was learning from Paul Robeson, who's learning the arts of political economic warfare, cultural warfare, and had a great alliance with John F. Kennedy, who worked with him to build things like the Volta River Dam, which was the biggest hydroelectric dam ever built in Africa's continent, only surpassed today by the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. But the idea was for that to be, and it still today has a little plaque in honor of the memory of John F. Kennedy. And the idea was for that to be the springboard for providing bountiful electricity for the purpose both of the industrialization of Africa, of Ghana, but of Africa more broadly. It was never supposed to stop. But then again, the CIA was not supposed to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah either and subvert all of this natural dynamic. But on top of that, okay, so you're asking, so what else was he doing? He was working to end the Cold War. How was he doing that? Well, he was putting on the table, if you go on YouTube, you can even see the speech he delivers at the United Nations 3 weeks before he is murdered. And you could listen to the recording of it. You could watch him deliver this speech where he calls for a mutual U.S.-Soviet collaborative space program to work together to begin to break free of the system of mutual assured destruction that was sort of the Manichaean framework that kept the Cold War functioning, of this idea that everybody's going to forever live with a knife blade to each other's throats. In this case, the knife blade being nuclear weaponry pointed at each other, with the idea that anybody who kills the next person will also be killed before they murder their enemy. That idea had to be replaced by a higher idea, which JFK understood and had collaborators in Russia also moving in that direction. It seems as though even the Arctic development, the Bering Strait rail tunnel, was something being negotiated in back channel fashion, which has been more recently revealed in the form of the Kirill Dmitriev's release of some of these pages from 1962 featuring the JFK Khrushchev peace bridge along the Bering Strait. So that was another element of what was being negotiated or planned, which would have ended the power and influence of the CIA, which relied on Manichaean, dark light dichotomizations of the world around evil versus good guys in order to justify their use of Nazis, mass assassination campaigns, terror tactics that NATO was doing with the CIA as a system of basic global management. So that could only be justified if you had the idea of the enemy image of the other. JFK was threatening to overthrow all of that stuff, and Khrushchev's own son, I'm not a fan of Khrushchev, but his own son gave an interview in 1997 saying that his father would have said yes if JFK had not been murdered. Then you have you're pointing out the banking front. I don't know so much about the elements of the silver-based currency. It did seem like he was moving things in that direction, but he was certainly trying to get back control, like the increase of protective tariffs that were under JFK's rule was an important deal that provided for the growth of American industry and American small and medium businesses, especially after the recession of 1957 and 1959. It was a terrible recession done by these same bankers who did a tight money strategy for no good reason, except they wanted to shut down the real economy. So he was doing a good job of undoing that by bringing back the principles that made America viable under the revolutionary policies of Abraham Lincoln and of later on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So there were so many on the cultural level. He was giving speeches refuting Thomas Malthus at the American Society of the American Society of Science. I forgot the specific name in 1961. I've got the transcripts where he's literally teaching Americans why Thomas Malthus's theory of overpopulation is incorrect because it denies the existence of human creative reason, which is the purpose of real science in his mind. So he's revolutionizing what real science should be instead of a system of just control and indoctrination for a high priesthood. He was saying, no, there's a very different, more pure idea of science that we have to fight for to bring back alive. And I think that his enemies around Mountbatten, Philip Mountbatten, Prince Bernhard, who worked with people like Julian Huxley to set up the World Wildlife Fund that later Mortimer Bloomfield from Permadex became a leading figure around. They were setting up their shop in 1961 with their manifestos, like the Morgs Manifesto, directly to counteract the type of spirit of the beauty of mankind and the beauty of a world of cooperating sovereign nation states that JFK was fighting to bring into being. They had to undo all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's JFK.
Yes, Matt. Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Really, okay. Sorry, I'm stunned, and this is a good thing. This is a good thing, right? This is a good thing. Just all this information that you're firing at me, and the impression that I get is how well referenced it is for you to speak that way, and it can all be checked and stuff. And it's like, oh my God, you're an encyclopedia. And I don't mean that disparagingly at all. You're an interesting encyclopedia, not like a dull dictionary. I'll give you that, right? Yeah.
It's like them splitting words.
Okay, so when you describe JFK, because I don't know much about it, it was before my time, and and the United States is very far away, and the U.S. past is even further. So he was into tariffs. He wanted to release the productive power of the American people. He was anti-imperialist. He wanted a world of sovereign nations working cooperatively together and mutual benefit for both. He wanted to end the Cold War. He was anti-globalist. When you said about Malthusian ideas and stuff, those evolved into the Great Reset as one of the manifestations of it nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, isn't that what Trump's doing?
I hope so. Like there's definitely something you can recognize if you know this history, which most has been taken away from most people through the control of the indoctrination centers called schools over the last decades.
Oh, by the way, just on that, Matt, forgive me, right? Benjamin Franklin was home educated.
Yes.
Yeah, he never went. He taught himself. He never went to school. He may have gone for a little while, but he was home educated. And I know that because John Taylor Gatto, who wrote extensively about home education, just talks about Ben Franklin a lot in his books. And I'm proud to say my 18-year-old and my 21-year-old never ever went to school. So that's the reason why. They didn't go to those indoctrination camps.
Well, you could see why the oligarchy is so obsessed with passing laws that prevent for homeschooling. Like in Germany, I've got friends in Germany with little kids, and they're thinking about moving to Austria or someplace else because you're not allowed by law to homeschool.
No.
They have to be put into a public school system. Still in Canada, you can do it, but there's a lot of movements right now to try to eliminate that choice for parents, and they want to do that across the board. So for clear reasons, So.
So back to Trump. So Trump's out to impose tariffs, and this is really from my conversations and listening to Promethean Action and having Susan Cookinda as a guest on my channel regularly, and Barbara Boyd once. That and Trump himself has said he wants to get rid of taxes and raise revenue through tariffs, like McKinley did, and like you're saying, JFK did to a certain extent. Trump wants to, from listening to Tom, have the US dollar backed by a mixture of gold and Bitcoin in reserve. Let me see what else. Then the new strategy that they've launched is about, well, we're not going to go out intervening, bombing people into democracy anymore. Yeah. We're not going to be doing that. And then one of the things in terms of the bilateral trade agreements that he's made, Susan Cookinda pointed out on one of our videos that the trade agreement with Australia for Australia's resources isn't just about buying the resources like the globalists want to do, extract the resources. No, we'll build a factory in Australia. So then you have the resources, we'll buy the products off you, the manufactured products. So then Australians get the upgrade.
Yes. Yeah, so that's right. There's certainly something one can recognize as having a precedence. It didn't come out of nowhere. What Trump is invoking, the spirit that was latent within the psyche of the people that rallied around him in 2016, it appealed to something that it confused many people around the world who because they don't know of this battle between a good America, good American tradition, with presidents who tend to get assassinated, unfortunately, but that is in opposition to this other imperial fifth column that's been incubating and that's loyal not to the American idea or cause or people, but rather to the system of control by a hereditary elite located across the ocean that has aspirations of godlike control of a new Olympus under a depopulated, highly fragmented feudal population of local serfdoms. That was the thing that America broke away from, and that remained in control of a certain aspect of the United States over the centuries, setting up such institutions like Wall Street as in a branch of the City of London in so many ways inside the heart of the United States, the Scottish Rite Freemasonic and also York Rite Freemasonic agencies that had been put in to infiltrate under the control of the United Grand Lodge, the better institutions within the United States, things like Skull and Bones, later on to consolidate the indoctrination of a new hereditary elite inside of the United States. You could only be a member if your parents, if your father, if your grandfather were also members of Skull and Bones, right? Many of these Greek letters, secret societies and fraternities and sororities were baked in from the 1830s, 40s, 50s, all over the USA, and many of its both elite colleges, but also lower level colleges, to just create a detached identity for the Americans that would result in them incubating their own oppressive agents that would then be loyal to this other power. That's part of the whole recolonization, not by purely physical force or economic force, but also by the control of the culture and educational systems. That's the key thing that allows for the other bad things to happen. So we've got these two Americas that have been vying for influence over what holds claim to the true traditions of the real America, and I think that we can safely say, if your audience has listened to Susan Cookinda and Tom Luongo and Alex and Harley Schlanger, then they have a sense of what I'm saying when I speak of this better, healthier America, that you could then see expressed in what Trump invoked. Of course, in my mind, it's still I'm less fully on board the optimism train and I'll just be full disclosure, as let's say Susan Cookinda is or Alex is. I have more doubts that there's maybe perhaps more Delphic games or games within games being played right now by transhumanist technocrats that are using the language and the mechanics of that which is good and which works, but with maybe a more insidious undertone or design that they might also have in mind. I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping
might
the
those
facts
be?
prove me wrong.
The stable coins as a as a way of bringing in CBDCs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a little bit of the, the Palantir, Oracle, Larry Ellison, Silicon Valley transhumanist, proto-eugenics types, the Elon Musk types who see themselves as transhumanists as their religious identity, which I don't trust transhumanists. I mean, if you have transhumanist opinions about a thing, that I can look the other way. But if your core philosophical identity and worldview, especially if you're a multi-billionaire with power and influence, and you're also a transhumanist who believes that we have to be superseded by self-thinking machines unless we merge with them through neural links and other things, then I don't trust you in general. And when you look at Palantir,
I just think you're being unnecessarily cynical and skeptical. You need to open up your heart to the transhumanist agenda and embrace becoming a cyborg versus a human being. For crying out, man!
maybe I'm a little close-minded. I don't know. But it gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I'm or like Palantir, the head of Palantir in the UK is this guy, what's his name? Lawrence, or forget his first name, Mosley. His last name's Mosley. You can Google his name for people watching. This guy Mosley, what's up with the name Mosley, right? Why should British people be a little creeped out by that name? Well, he's the grandson of Sir Oswald Mosley, the head of the British Union of Fascists, who was going to become the Nazi of England. Had England actually taken on Hitler's request for them to stay on as allies, it would have been this guy in play instead of Churchill as the prime minister. And his family continued to be very prestigious even after World War II was over. He became a leading architect and promoter of the European Union. He wrote a book on it in 1946. That's what he was going to do with high priority. Had he been the British Nazi prime minister, he was going to make the European Union the highest priority for Europe upon achieving that. Sorry, go on.
Of course, the European Union is a completely noble, democratic organization with some fine values, as Alex Craner keeps pointing out, like censorship, like lack of political accountability, like corruption, like just great things like pushing for war with Russia. You don't tell me you disagree with those notions, do you?
Well, wholesome values
you're not one of these people that like these humanity lovers, are you, Matt?
You've mastered Alex Crater's art of dry sarcastic humor, I see.
I'm trying to learn from the best.
Yeah. It's weird, right? How you have these like Nazi second, third generation spawn in positions of like massive influence across the former, like the current head of MI6 now, I forgot her name. Her grandfather being also the butcher, that was his name, right? As a Russian defector who worked for the Ukrainian Nazi Waffen SS operatives. You got people like Chrystia Freeland, who's the head of the Rhodes Trust now, the former deputy prime minister of Canada, whose grandfather was the Mikhail Shomiak, who's like the top Nazi propagandist in Ukraine, like the Goebbels of Ukraine, running the biggest like Nazi press agencies that they confiscated from the Jews in 1941 to 45. That's her. Like what Ursula von der Leyen? What was her grandparents and parents doing? During.
Well, I remember Kurt Waldheim, who was president of Austria at one time, and he was a Nazi officer or something. Right?
You got so many of these things. You got Merz as well has some strange Nazis in that closet too. And as you pointed out, like the head of NATO, what's his name?
Rutte.
No. Sorry, the 1961 head of the General Secretary of NATO, Heusinger, Alfred Heusinger, was formerly the head of the Nazi Joint Chiefs of Staff under Hitler. That guy then becomes the head of NATO. What kind of working with Lyman Lemnitzer, who's the actual like the top dog at NATO is Lyman Lemnitzer, and under him is the former head of the Nazi General Staff. You got the guy running the West German political intelligence agency for like 20 years is the former head of chief intelligence officer under Hitler too, whose name is all of a sudden escaping me. It'll come later. But yeah, like these guys were repurposed. They were never, absolved. They never absolved themselves, or they never said I'm sorry. Yes. They were just given a new tactic to just do the thing that Hitler wanted to do back in the 40s, and that didn't work out that way. So they had to sort of reshift gears and do it a new way.
Yeah, well, the impression that I get, because when I heard about Kurt Waldheim and stuff, and I saw the thing the other day about MI6, the head of MI6, her grandfather being this Ukrainian Nazi, it just seems like coincidence. It just sort of happened. But what you're pointing to, and I think most people are completely unaware, are the connections at this elite level between these different groups, these different, like the European royal families, the uber billionaires, these secret societies that we just don't know about.
Mm, mm-hmm.
It's like there's a net. You know the sort of Starlink neural net or whatever. Well, we already have this net of secret societies because also listening to you, and I'm, you in Canada as a former British colony, and a sort of
former.
Okay. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We are proudly colonized.
That's right. That's right. I forgot what Mark Carney's job was before he became.
Yeah.
That's right. But I imagine it's the similar sort of structures in Pakistan and India, and it would be similar sort of structures in Kenya and South Africa. And it might be that you might turn around and say, well, actually, Nelson Mandela worked for the City of London. Like, what? I'm not saying that, by the way, if anybody's watching this, right? But just the sort of twists and turns and the way that we've been played.
Yes, absolutely.
By the elites. And that they've been doing this for a very, very long time. And they're really good at it.
Yeah, they are, and they just keep us dizzy, right? So they spin us around, so it's difficult to focus if you're always dizzy, and you've always got, like you said, these neural, like these nets in the mind that deflect the mind's attention away from the actual arsonist lighting fires to the village, and instead you're like, oh, it's Chinese Chicoms are out to get me. And it's like, well, what about this thing that's been here killing our presidents for like 250 years, running roughshod over the world, like running the international dope trade since, 1830? Like, what about that thing that never seems to have gotten dealt with? Like, why don't we look at that for a second instead of immediately like falling for the first narrative that can like spin an argument or reframe an argument to make it seem like China is the cause of all of our problems that we should give our hate and our fear to? Maybe maybe there's something for us to learn from if we look at how China and patriots in China have been able to battle their deep state and like drain the swamp that we haven't yet properly figured out how to do. I'm hoping Trump can pull this off, but we haven't figured it out. They've done a much better. They kicked out George Soros from China in 1989. Wow, that's when Soros got kicked out and was never allowed to re-enter at that point because one of his assets, Zhao Ziyang, was made Secretary of General of the Chinese Communist Party from 1987 to 89. Like a Soros puppet got installed as the top dog in China with all of his entourage brought in to basically do what Gorbachev was doing to liberalize and massively privatize the entire Chinese economy, as was happening in Russia at the same time. The difference was that China was better than the Russians at realizing what this enemy operation was overseen by Soros, the CIA, the Rockefeller machinery that had like taken over in the 1970s with the Trilateral Commission. They were able to see it and actually intervene to prevent this regime change planned out in June 4th, 1989. And they stopped the regime change. It's today called Tiananmen Square. It wasn't a massacre, by the way. It was a color revolution overseen by the CIA and Soros, and you can prove that and take it to the bank. And we made a video on that. But then as the outcome, they put Soros's assets in jail. Zhao Ziyang spent the rest of his days in jail. Soros was banned. And whoever didn't go to jail got out because they were given protection by the CIA's operations in Hong Kong with the British that had a massive operation. That means Hong Kong was still under British control. And with the help of triads, and this is on Wikipedia, you can get this stuff. It's like, this is not secret knowledge. They were then brought through Operation Yellowbird to be set up in Toronto, in New York, in California, in England, in Australia as a new network that would then be called the Patriots of China and form the backbone of what becomes things like, Epoch Times and Miles Guo's entire operation, who's like this guy who avoided jail in China because there's been a massive anti-corruption crackdown. He was high up on the list of one of the most corrupt people in China, according to evidence that seems to have been brought to light, and he avoided it by coming in with letters of recommendation from Tony Blair to get a condo that he purchased for like $16 million in New York. Again, with letters of recommendation from his friend Tony Blair that got him this condo where he began working with Steve Bannon immediately in co-creating and co-managing this entire globally extended deep state structure of China designed to overthrow Xi Jinping and bring back the dreams of Zhao Ziyang and Soros of the 80s. And that's what we're supposed to be afraid of and think is the cause of all of our problems and fentanyl and crime and all the bad things causing us to fear the future. I mean, come on, people. Like, focus a little bit here. Focus.
No, Matt, I do appreciate where you beat yourself.
Yeah, no problem.
Not quite yet channeling Tom Luongo.
I got my long filter on. I'm just
okay. Now, I want to go back a little bit.
I've downloaded it from my Neuralink. I just
that's right, because they want us to behave. They want us to be good cyborgs, right? Good transhumans. Going back to what you're saying about how they've twisted our heads and our minds, they're like distracting us with something over here, and actually, oh my God, we're not seeing that thing over there, right? And the way I think a really great example is if I look at how the European and British media, and even I suppose the American media, regard Obama or Blair versus Trump, and the anathema, the hostility, the inability to pass anything by those that suffer from TDS, because they won't even look. Well, what's this tariff policy about? What's the American system of political economy? What is the new strategy say, really? Because I don't read the Times of London, but it was just saying that it's just white supremacist and nationalist and racist. And then people just swallow that, absolutely swallow it. And there's so much of that I think empire has been doing for hundreds of years. Like, for example, people swallowing the whole lie about schooling.
Yes. Yes.
That could be a whole other conversation.
If you do tariffs, you must be an isolationist. You must be a proto-fascist because, if you don't want to play with your neighbors, it means you must want to suppress your neighbors. And it's like,
you're not going to allow us to manipulate you, then you're a bad person.
Yeah, really. It's these basic syllogisms that they kind of embed within their argumentation that are so far from any type of provable reality. Because if you look at the history of the application of tariffs, and it's a very different picture you get. Like in the best of, and it doesn't mean that there's not an unwise, sloppy application of tariffs that do damage. That exists too. But when they're done well, you get, ironically, whether the period of McKinley or whether the period of John F. Kennedy or Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, whenever they're done well, you have both a conjunction of an increase of small and medium enterprises, the private sector blossoms. You also have increased bounty of finished goods being produced in a nation that otherwise would only have raw materials as an exporter, because now with the protective tariffs, you're able to incubate things protected by foreign powers who can't undercut, sabotage the development of these nascent industries. Of course, you don't want to have a forever formula. At first you might want to have a high tariff, but over time, as we get better at doing the thing, whatever you want to develop, the tariff can reduce as we can compete more effectively on the markets, on the global markets. But we always have a conjunction of increased qualitative fair trade between nations. So it's not like you ever have the case of protective tariffs isolating nations. When it's done well, you always have a blossoming of both. And it only works, though, if everybody cares about their people and their economies. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. Then so you have to get the players, the relevant, powerful nations, to have different degrees of amplitude, at least some spirit, that they want their nation to succeed, their civilization to succeed, their economy to succeed. And that has to animate the spirit of how you modulate your protective tariffs, how you animate your priorities of what infrastructure do you build, and what R&D do you invest in at any given moment, that you provide the contracts for the private sector who are doing bids to see who can do the job better, whether it's a space project or whatever else. And it's a harmonization of the nation with the private sector. It's not one or the other like we've been told today. You have to pick one, either be a radical, hardcore Keynesian or Marxist and pick one extreme, or become an Austrian school, privatize everything, other thing, libertarian, and pick an extreme. And it's like, that's a false choice. That's not how history unfolded. It always unfolded through a different dynamic that is outside of this rigged game of choices that JFK was very much in tune to when he was working with Kwame Nkrumah and the private Kaiser Steel Company to provide for against the JP Morgan Steel, so you had JP Morgan's United Steel that's representing a very evil, vicious, anti-development, pro-Malthusian agenda designed to destroy the U.S. economy from within at the time that JFK is fighting. But he's got allies amongst patriotic networks who have an influence. At the time it was big, was Kaiser Steel, that was anti-JP Morgan Steel. And we're the ones who were providing the means, just like Aldo Moro was doing it at ENI. not ENI, the Italian energy company, by providing incentive structures to help colonialized people break free at very reasonable interest rates of investment and technology transfer of the best quality of technology that would be available for nations of Africa and Pakistan and others. Bhutto later on, Benazir's father, who got assassinated overseen by Kissinger in '79, was also doing the same thing, working to access the highest quality nuclear power for Pakistan, which he was told by Kissinger, you're not allowed to have nuclear power. That's only for the Anglo-Saxon dominant races to have, not you guys. So he got his ass killed or executed by these same Trilateral Commission operatives. So it's the same fight always,
Matt, absolutely incredible. Just to let you know, you're coming back on, because there's all sorts of directions we could go in. I mean, this is an invitation, of course. I'm not able to mandate you, not yet, but wait till I get CBDCs and digital IDs, then you'll be under my control.
All right.
That's right, with the transhumanist neural link or whatever, right? Anything you want to say before we finish up?
No, I'm hoping that people take this crisis as an opportunity to make up for lost time where we could have been learning and becoming the better part of ourselves that we could have been, that we weren't doing, because we thought things were a different picture existed of reality than the one that we find is actually our reality. We are living through a systemic breakdown. Some of it's kind of controlled. There's potentials for a much brighter, beautiful future right now available to us. A lot of powerful players representing civilizational forces have rejected the Malthusian mass kill and would prefer to put something better in play to replace the Malthusian system. Hopefully we can take part in that. And my books, like I said, my videos that I do with my wife are available to hopefully increase the muscle power of people who want to, do some heavy lifting now mentally for going into the new year. Yes.
Thank you. And the thing that I notice in this conversation for myself, right, is, and then what you provide, I think so much of the analysis that people do is superficial, surface level, tabloid level analysis.
Yeah,
that's it.
Better. It could be so much better if they tried harder.
No digging in, no looking beyond the surface. Now, I like to think as a child protection social worker, my job is to go beyond the surface. Like, for example, there's a family I've been dealing with recently where the father says, no, it's the couple are separated. The father says it's the mum who's perpetrating domestic abuse and being coercive and controlling. And then the mother says, no, actually, it's him. He's got a track record of violence as well. And they're squabbling over their two little girls, right? And automatically, what's already always there, it's likely to be the dad. Just because men tend to be, I've come across more male perpetrators of domestic abuse, right? And then believe women and all of that. And I suppose my own indoctrination as an old school British lefty. I work in social work, right? But then if I go beyond the surface and I start digging in and examining all the claims that are being made, it's like, oh, actually it's her. She's the one who's throwing shade. Because I start picking it apart.
Yeah.
So, and then, but people don't do that. And I have to hold both positions while I'm digging in. People don't do that. They just decide and that's it.
They want the nice, comfortable, absolute answer they could just hold on to. That means they don't have to think any more about nuance or anything. They just want that right answer that rewarded you when you were in school and you got that right answer by cheating, going to the back of the textbook and getting that right answer. And it's like, no, it might make you feel good, but it's actually going to cause you to sink in the long run.
Yes. Now, a conversation with you, I don't know if you saw the conversation I had with Blaine Holt and Ian Burlingame, where they were telling me what was going on in Venezuela. I was like, oh my God, it's like I opened the fridge and there's a den of vipers and tarantulas and parasites. It's horrible, right? And then a conversation with you is like, no. We're going to look under the carpet. No, Rich, we're going to dig up the floorboards. And you're going to see all these termites and rats scurrying around underneath. It's like, oh, thanks, Matt.
I'm gonna clip that out and use it for my own propaganda purposes to self-promote. I love what you just said there, but thank you so much for saying that.
You're so welcome.
I tried.
You're so welcome. Well, this is why people should subscribe and comment and like and do all the business that they need to do. Follow you on X and check out your websites and check out your books. Really, really appreciate it. It's been really, really great talking to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.